The three pivotal steps is you need to understand what your business really is, the outcomes and value create, not what you sell. What you sell is just a vehicle for creating value. What's the value impact of your business? Why do customers choose you? And when you can really understand that, then the team understands what value they're delivering and what their role is. So the second then is setting the team up to win. And that is what leads you to the whole idea of creating a market of raving fans. They're literally out there marketing for you.
Welcome to another episode of the Leading to Fulfillment podcast, where everything we talk about is meant to encourage people-first leaders, empower individuals to achieve fulfillment, and help your organizations become places people love to work. I'm your host, James Laws, and I have a great show in store for you. My guest for this episode is Patti Mara. Patti is the author of the book UpSolutions, Turning Your Teams into Heroes and Your Customers into Raving Fans, the owner of Marinette Inc., and the creator of the Profit Generator program and the Breaking Through Barriers program. In my conversation with Patti, we discussed the differences between upsales and UpSolutions, the real role your team members play in your business, and how you reinforce that role with position agreements, how to help employees of all industries find fulfilling careers, and signs that something needs to change in your business, and how to approach it. If you enjoy this or past episodes, I want to invite you to subscribe to the Leading Fulfillment podcast in your favorite podcast tool. We're on Apple, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and we are also on YouTube. Now, let's jump into my conversation with Patti Mara. Patti, thank you so much for joining me today.
James, an absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me on Leading to Fulfillment.
Oh, I am so excited about this conversation. You have a book and a program called UpSolutions, and I've been listening to, because I couldn't get the book shipped to me fast enough based on the timing of this interview. But I've been listening to the book. I'm about halfway through. I understand the idea of, and probably most listeners understand the idea of upsales and cross sales. What is UpSolutions? Like, where did that term come from, and what does it mean?
Fabulous. And I love that we're starting with this conversation, because it really is a pivotal point. And so UpSolutions is literally the 180-degree contrast of upselling. You know, upselling is, would you like fries with that? Right? You're always trying to do add-on sales. And UpSolutions is a pivotal shift, literally a 180 shift. It's who is the customer in front of me? Who am I dealing with, and how do I create an impact? It turns team members, frontline team members, front-facing, I love that. Somebody said that recently, front-facing team members from order takers or focused on tasks to being problem solvers and solution providers. You really turn them into heroes for your customers. And I just want to expand a little bit that the rule of thumb in any business is that your customers don't know the questions to ask to make an effective buying decision. And similar, on the same bent, anyone who's worked in your business for 3 months or more is an expert compared to your customers. And so if your team are not engaging with every customer that interacts, whether it's online or brick and mortar in the store, it doesn't matter. If you're not engaging with your customers in such a way that you're using the wisdom of the team to ask effective questions that pulls out the information so that a customer can make, or a client can make, a relevant decision that they're happy with, that fits their needs, they didn't even know to consider, then your business is falling short. I think you're leaving the most crucial cornerstone component of your business, what sets you apart in the marketplace and creates satisfaction and raving fans. You're leaving it on the table. So UpSolutions is all about being problem solver. And it was a pharmacy owner, Chris Corneliuson, who coined the term, with engaging with his team to, recommend nutraceuticals, supplements to patients on different medications, because a lot of medications cause your body to be nutrient deficient. And so if someone who's working in the pharmacy, for example, with a diabetic patient, if they're not recommending the supplements they need, they're literally ripping the patient off because they don't know that they need to be on things like calcium, which might be simple, but they just don't know. So upsales versus UpSolutions, literally the polar opposite. It's all about creating great outcomes and values for your customers.
I really love it. And it's funny because when we look at the work and professional culture of the past and well beyond the Great Resignation, but of the past, you can almost hear the stereotypical boss or leader telling their team, "I don't pay you to think." And 100% of the time, I tell my team, I 100% pay you to think. That's why you're paid. You're not paid to press a button. You're not paid to be my keyboard. You're not paid to just do the thing I tell you to do. You're paid to help me see the blind spots that I don't see because I'm too far from the customer. Front facing or front line, they are the first point of touch. So I love that idea of adding value and getting your team involved in that process is profound and huge.
Yeah, and I agree, James. Listen, here's the thing: if you think you're ordering team order takers, if you think you're employing order takers, and they don't need to think, literally, you're going to go out of business, or it's going to be automated. A robot can do this, right?
That's it.
And it's like Amazon's opening brick and mortar stores right now. Why? Because people want to touch and feel what they're buying. One of my favorite brands that were launched, Allbirds. I love Allbirds. They started off with, wool. It started off with the wool industry in New Zealand, hiring these guys to create a market for wool because the wool industry's bottomed out. So they created these wool runners that are, low carbon footprint, and they're fabulous, right? And now they've got eucalyptus and wool, and I love them. I've got 3 pairs. But they started opening up brick and mortar stores because even though their whole business was launched online, again, they're selling more in stores. But in you're doing that, you have to create the experience.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love it. It's great stuff. Listen, that's really the whole purpose of this podcast and Circles in general, the website where the podcast lives, is to help leaders make their organizations places people love to work. Part of that is acknowledging that they actually are experts. They are paid to think. And with that focus and with your focus really on growing healthy teams. In fact, one of the taglines on the UpSolutions book, right, is let me see. I actually have it here. You know it faster than I do, but I'm going to read it anyway. It's UpSolutions is turning teams into heroes, and with that kind of focus, what's the first step in making that true for your teams after you acknowledge the fact, right, that they are paid to think, they are experts? After that, what is the next steps to making that true and turning your teams into heroes?
Fabulous. And I just want to add, because the full byline is turning your team into heroes and customers into raving fans.
That's true.
Right? Because if you want raving fans for your business, you better have a great team that engages with your customers. You can't short step that. You can't stop. One does not create the other. You must start with that. I would say the 3 pivotal steps is you need to understand what your business really is, the outcomes and value create, not what you sell. What you sell is just a vehicle for creating value. What's the value impact of your business? Why do customers choose you? And when you can really understand that, then the team understands what value they're delivering and what their role is. So the second then is setting the team up to win. And that is what leads you to the whole idea of creating a market of raving fans. They're literally out there marketing for you. So let you ask the question, the kind of the sandwich, in the meat of the sandwich is setting the team up to win. And so I like to talk about there are different pillars in setting the team up to win. The most important piece is they understand the value of the business. The next is they understand their role. How do they create value? What's the outcome? Not just the tasks that they're responsible for in their role, but what's the outcome? How do they do those tasks to create value for customers, right? So they need to understand that clear standards, not just tasks, standards. There needs to be a really good communication structure. And you see this a lot. We don't want to be buried in meetings. We don't want, and I've worked with a lot of entrepreneurial operated businesses, and often, it's all in their head. But if you don't have a regular, at a minimum, a regular weekly meeting, a huddle, 20 minutes, no more than 30 minutes. This is not a working meeting. This is a connection meeting. What got produced in the last week? What is everyone working on this week? What are key projects that everyone needs to be aware of are going on in the business? The key information. 20, 30 minutes once a week. Some businesses do morning huddles. That's fabulous. But at least once a week, you need to stop your team feeling like they're guessing.
Yeah.
My argument is that your team, especially your front-facing team, but your team are the most important profit driver of your business. So if they're not set up to win, if they're trying to figure out how do they win in their role, like what should I do, they're guessing wrong a lot of the time, especially if they don't know what's going on and what the priority or focus is. So you're literally shutting down what could be the main profit driver in your business. And then the fourth piece of that, setting the team up to win, is the team members also need to know how well they're doing. So there has to be some kind of a feedback loop. We often, focus on, especially business owners, we focus on what's not working. And wherever you put your attention, that's what expands. So there needs to be some kind of a structure that you're consciously aware and recognizing what is working. And if there's any that needs to happen, but that, it's somebody I said once, there should be like a 10-to-1 ratio of acknowledging superstars when they're doing things that really contribute to the business and you appreciate, to the corrective conversations you're having.
Yeah. And we hear that all the time, right? The best thing to do is praise the behaviors you want to see more of. And many times, I don't want to say ignore it, but underplay the things that you don't want to see more of, because really what you're trying to do is elevate the behaviors and say, shine a light on it so everyone on the team can look at it and say, this is the standard we're looking for. And I love everything that you had to say there. It reminds me, as I think about fulfillment, and before we started recording, I was talking a little bit about my fulfillment model, and I talked about the cornerstones or the motivational drivers. But one of the cornerstones that helps make up those motivational drivers is clarity. You have to, as a leader, it is our responsibility to bring clarity into the organization. And all of your 4 pillars, as you talk about, it's all about giving your team the clarity that they need to win. And I love every part of it. A while back, I had read a book and even implemented the organizational system to try it out early on in my business, called Holacracy. And if you're not familiar with Holacracy, it's rough. I mean, it's very interesting, but it's rough. But one of the things that they do is, for every role, not every person, but for every role, they have you define a purpose statement. And just this idea of like, I exist to do this. And we are familiar with this in the business level. Like, our businesses exist to, for instance, Circles, Circles exists to help your business become a place people love to work. That's one of the things that we're striving to do. And so I love that idea of creating that kind of purpose statement, because it gives you clarity at the end of the day, when there are no marching orders, when there is no the next thing to do. You go back to that purpose statement and, like, at customer success, my job is to make raving fans. I am at the service of that purpose. And that clarity of defining what is the win in that purpose statement is so powerful.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I like to see in a business, rather than job descriptions, is instead call them position agreements. And it's tapping into exactly what you're saying, James, because a job description is describing the tasks of that role. A position agreement literally says, who do they report to? What is the purpose of their role? How does this role contribute to the success of the business? And then, yes, the key tasks are responsible for, but then what are the standards? What are the standards for this role, and what are the company-wide standards? For example, I've worked with a number of independently owned pharmacies. And so, maybe the standard is that a phone is answered within 3 rings. A message is returned within 2 hours or by the next business day if later in the day. A customer is greeted within 3 steps of being in the physical store. Those are the standards. The task is to greet and welcome customers. But what's the expectation? Because again, if it's not being stated, then it's assumed. And we all know what it means when we think. There's a team training I came across years and years ago, and I loved it because the main coach and the creator of the program said that the feedback she gets most often from teams in her team training is that the number one skill set to work effectively with an entrepreneur is clairvoyance or ESP. They're literally trying to read the mind of the entrepreneur all the time. And the problem is they're guessing wrong, but they're trying. Everyone wants to feel that they're winning. If we don't feel like we're winning, we're shutting down and quitting.
Yeah.
So if you want a purposeful business, if you want to feel fulfilled as an owner of a business, then your team needs to have a culture that they feel fulfilled, or you'll never hit it for the owner.
That is such an important thought on every level, because as a leader, as a business owner, I've caught myself with this same situation, is that my team, everything that I say almost ends up being like instructive or an order or a mandate if I'm not careful. And as an entrepreneur, I've got a lot of ideas that are just constantly flowing. And so if my team is around me and I just start talking, it is very easy for the team to go, oh, he seems really passionate about that. I think that's something he's wanting us to pivot and start focusing on. So now I've had to start myself by saying, if I've been in a tangent, or if I'm about to start a tangent, that say, I am just talking out loud. Nobody is to change course. You already know what you have been hired to do. Please do not change course. I'm just dreaming. I'm just talking out loud. And that's also why I tell all leaders to, when you're talking about solutions, talking about engaging your team into those solutions, is you ought to be the last one to talk. Like as soon as you say something, the solution has been etched in stone by a leader, it's over. Like you shut the conversation down. So in order to do that, talk last, talk less, and just listen to your team. And so I love that idea that we have to be very mindful about giving that clarity to our team members in every area of our communication.
Absolutely, James. And I love what you just said about, talk last, talk less, and listen more. I mean, that should be the mantra for all business owners.
Mm-hmm.
And because we're creators, right? We're in the creative zone all the time. And you're spot on. It's like there's in fact, a lot of times team members who we hire to fulfill the roles within our company have it thought out in their head, and then they're taking action. Whereas most entrepreneurs, not all, but most entrepreneurs, certainly creative entrepreneurs, we think out loud. And your spot, I've created damage, I've created costly mistakes because I'm like blah 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 blah, and the team already are putting in place. It's like, whoa, wait.
Yep.
That was just thinking.
It's happened way more times than I wish in my decades of business, where I have set people off course totally unintentionally. We walk away and then they come back with something, and I'm like, why did you start doing that? Like I talk about a lot of stuff, but they don't initially, until they get to know the culture of a particular leader or entrepreneur. They don't know what the expectation is. And so they assume what the leader says is what's supposed to be acted on. And so I love giving more and more and additional clarity to the team. One of the biggest things that I've seen too is talking, kind of coming back to how do we empower our teams to be successful. One of the biggest things that I think the pandemic has shown leaders, and the
Mhm.
Great Resignation is certainly telling leaders and businesses about this, is that everyone really wants their work to revolve around their lives and not the
Mhm.
other way around. That's
Mhm.
one of my in our company, in our team, that is one of our big mottos. Is we are big on work-life integration, meaning you integrate your work into your life where it makes sense. Because let's be honest, your kid's field trip doesn't work around like what you want to do. Like if you want to go on that, you should be able to do that. So we're really big on trying to create this kind of work-life integration, giving people the opportunity to live a fulfilling personal life as well as a
Mhm.
fulfilling professional life. Of course, that doesn't always work in all industries. So, given that, how do we reconfigure our businesses so that everyone still has a place to work, but is still able to have some of that flexibility and fulfillment?
Mm. It is the conversation right now, James. I mean, this, we keep hearing about the great resignation. I think it's a misnomer. I think it's a great reset. And I shouldn't say that because that's a whole other buzzword in the world these days. But but it's there's crisis interrupts all patterns. We've been in a crisis in North America for the last 2 years. A lot of countries in the world, but particularly in North America in the last 2 years, and so it's a huge opportunity. I mean, there's always a yin yang to everything. It's a huge opportunity to redesign. Human nature, we tend to keep moving forward based on the structure that's worked for us yesterday and in the past. And this is now we're in redesign stage.
Yeah.
This is an opportunity to future forward your business. And part of that is designing the team culture that really maximizes the productivity and the output the impact you have in your community. But it starts with creating that, fulfillment culture with your team. So I will say, this is the time to embrace technology. I use Slack for communication. I mean, what's the tech? And a lot of it's very, very inexpensive. What you start with? What's the output of the business? What's the talent required to create it? And how do you leverage and support the talent? And now you're starting to look at what technology will support. But this is the time to really challenge and reevaluate every method, POS, um, product placement, messaging, communication, team structure. Everything is now. I'd like to see every business create a 5 to 10 year vision, really purposeful, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Impactful vision. What's the outcome you create? What's the difference you make? And then with that, what's needed in your business today and moving forward? What are you building to reach that vision? And we're kind of breaking up the chains of how we did it in the past. That really is no longer working.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. The way we think of work, or the way we used to think about work, is no longer working. And the pandemic certainly didn't cause it. It just revealed it. It opened our
It
eyes to the
accelerated.
fact.
It
Yeah.
accelerated.
It
Yeah.
accelerated. I think that's a good way of putting it. It accelerated what was already coming. It just kind of forced our hand to say we need to look more deeply at it. And I like what you said about like rethinking about what is necessary to produce your product, produce your services, and thinking about the team that's needed. I fell into that even as a software company. One of my businesses, a couple of my businesses are software based, and for the longest time, we were able to think about engineering and marketing and operations as a flexible work environment. But our support team, we had to have certain support coverage. And so we need to make sure there was people in support. But our support was email. I don't know what I was thinking. I was like, our support's email. Like, we don't, I don't care whether you work late hours, early mornings, or work 2 hours and take 4 off, 2 hours, take two off. I don't care as long as you're getting in there and helping our customers and taking care of them. So live the life that is as fulfilling as you can, and make sure that and you said it right at the very beginning. If we take care of our team will take care of our customers. Like that, I always think of it as a business leader, that my business culture is the product that I'm creating for my team, and then my team creates the service and the product for my customer. And so I know my first responsibility is to take care of that. But as a wise songwriter once wrote, changes aren't permanent, but changes. And I think that's especially true in business today. You talked about it. I think that's exactly what you're talking about. It's like we have to be ready to change. So I have a couple of questions. I'll start with this first one is I think we get pretty familiar with our businesses. In fact, I just recently put someone else in charge of one of my products because I realized I was too close and I needed to create some distance. You're in it every day. You think you kind of become numb to what's going on around you. What are some signs that something big does need to change in your business?
Um, I think I would do this in twofold. First of all, I'm going to quote Peter Drucker, the brilliant management guru, Peter Drucker. If you measure it, you can manage it. If you manage it, you can improve it. So the first thing for me is really identifying what your key metrics are, and some of them will be ratios in a business, right?
Yeah.
So if this, then what? And so the first thing is what are you measuring? What are you keeping your focus on? It's like an airplane dashboard. There are hundreds of different dials and levers and meters and all of this stuff in an airplane cockpit, and they focus on 5 to fly the plane. The rest are there in case they're into trouble, right? So what's your dashboard metrics that you're paying attention to? Because it'll tell you if you're not on track, you're not growing slowly, you're decreasing, something's not. So that's important. But the other is, I just can't emphasize enough the importance of being in communication with your customers. Whoever your target audience is, your team talks to them regularly. So capturing your team, understanding the importance of the communication, hearing the message, what's being communicated, that's important, not just answering the words or responding to the words, but really your team need to be set up to hear the message. And then that's discussed, that's captured and discussed. I just recently came across an article about an engineer, a software engineer, who created a website for his sister who's getting married that brought together all the disparate, vendors, services, lists, wish lists, all that stuff, brought it all together because she was just, in the deep end trying to manage, getting her wedding ready. So he created software to bring it all together in one website, and they call it Joy. And it was so successful, like shared it with friends. It was so successful that they've launched, and they don't. It's free to use. They get a very small percentage back from the companies that get access to people through the site, but not gouging. It's very small. But they're getting 1.8 million visitors a month right to this website because they've created this great website. But the key piece in the interview was, he has built a team where a lot of online businesses, you can't reach a live person ever. 2, his team talked to 500 couples a day. 500 couples a day, right? So their thumbs on the pulse all the time. What are they looking for? What do they like? What do they don't like? What's the biggest challenge you're dealing with? So they can be really adaptive to still be at that forefront. Because if you're talking to that many customers a day and you're capturing that market research, that real live feedback, I mean, that's brilliant.
Yeah. No, I think that's amazing advice. We actually have just recently gone through a whole market research and process for one of our products. And one of the main processes of that is discovering who our actual target audience is and then getting them on the phone and talking to them and understanding how they use our product, why they chose us over someone else, and all of that. And so such a huge thing. My next question is related to this idea of what needs to change. And it's a question that's something we struggled with early on in our business. We had created an accidental core value of everything changes Monday. It was just that we were a young company, we were a startup, and things just were happening rapidly. And so that we ended up with a lot of unfinished work because the work we were doing was all of a sudden not as interesting as this new opportunity. And so we would shift, and everything changes Monday. And what ended up happening, as you can probably guess, is the team became very skittish about change. All of a sudden, every change felt pretty big and dramatic. So I'm interested to hear your answer. When you need to make a big change in your business, and you've talked to your customers, you've talked to your team, or whatever, however you've gotten to assess that, and you need to make a change in your business, how do you introduce change and get buy-in from your team appropriately? How do you introduce the idea and start that process of change?
Yeah, it's a great, and we kind of touched on it earlier, James, when we talked about, are we thinking out, like owning as an entrepreneur? Are we thinking out loud, or is this actually an actionable item? So being more conscious, right? So I would say the first piece for me is to really do, as the owner, really do the thinking ahead of time. So I have something I call an idea bank. And when you just to capture thoughts, so it's all in one spot, categorized, easy searchable, that kind of thing. And then part of it is, the next piece of it is flushing out, what's the purpose of this idea, what's the outcome, what's the outcome, what are the success criteria, like why am I interested in this? And then it's having a conversation, because I tend to forget what my team's working on. And so
Right.
I will say, can you do this for me? And in my mind, I have this expectation they're going to do it immediately, but they're working on 2 or 3 other projects already. So, if there's an urgency, then it's actually having setting the expectation, can you do this for me and get this part of it back to me by tomorrow? And then they'll say, well, I'm working on this, this, and this. Do you want me to park one of these, or should we wait to implement, so part of that is getting input from the team, rather than everything is from the mount directive, do this, do this, do this. It's really that, team engagement, saying, okay, so this is, I've got a webinar I'm planning right now that we're doing all the promotion for. And so, yes, there's all the different components, but we had it as a discussion, planning out, and got my team's input. Now, a piece of this, and I actually wrote this down from what we were talking about later, I've recognized, and I'm not always good at it, but it's there at the back of my mind. Every once in a while, on a fairly decent regularity, I think it's important to ask my team for their input. And as you said, shut up and listen to it. And I'll give you an example. I did a 5-day business reinvention challenge in 2020. And I have a marketing manager. And so, I'm in the creative and I'm dating the woods. I have no idea what's needed for Facebook advertising, except I knew we needed to do some Facebook advertising. So I'm deep in the weeds of the creative and reviewing copy and all that stuff. And it wasn't until we launched, because in my mind, I think a week ahead of time, if you start promoting something a week ahead of time, and I didn't realize Facebook needed 10 days to get the algorithms down to know you're hitting the right market. It needed 2 weeks at least. And so I don't know what I don't know. And what I didn't do at the beginning of that project is ask my marketing manager, who does know, Allie, how much time do we need, to launch this, to get the word out, to produce, for this challenge. And so that was a big lesson. That was a big lesson learned, and so that's another piece, is just in the back of my mind, just really tap into, because I think we're missing incredible amount of talent if we're only telling people what to do or not inviting them to share what their insight is. We don't have to take action on it, but we're really missing the talent if we're not asking.
I remember reading in a book too, talking about change. One of the things that they said is that most people are not afraid of change, they're afraid of transition. because transition is always handled so poorly by so many. And so there is this period of time where, in helping your teams transition and big changes, make sure you take care to actually think about, what does that transition look like? Are you doing it deliberately? Are you communicating well? Have you created a lot of clarity? Have you tell them the why of the change? Have you communicated that so that they can be on board? And have you engaged them to be a part of that transition and what transitions need to take place? So all great stuff. Amazing wisdom for people as they're thinking about this. You have created a resource for for people listening to the podcast that they can use in their own business. First of all, they can get the book. I'll tell you about your book. Again, UpSolutions. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it off of her website. I'm going to give you a link. I don't recommend a ton of books. There's a few, I have a handful of books that I recommend that are like my go-to books. There's a lot of business books out there that are so like pie in the sky, flighty. They're idea books, but they don't actually, there's no application, there's no practicality to them. I love how functional your book is. And I'm only halfway through, so I can only assume there's great stuff in the second half of the book. But even in the first half, there is so much application and functional. I've even thought about it. I do have you can apply this book to any business, you do talk a lot about kind of the brick and mortar and the retail space store. And I own a retail coffee shop. And listening to some of the things you think about, it gave me so many ideas about, and I think we do a great job, but reading the book and listening to the book, I was like, man, we could do so much better. And there's so many cool things that we could be doing if we want to apply them. So I highly recommend people check out this book if you want a real applicable book to your business that you can actually read and actually start getting ideas and strategies that you could apply to your business. It's amazing. Also, though, for the rest of the podcast resources, you gave us a link for the listeners. If you go to pattymara.com, that's pattimara.com/leading to fulfillment. She has a wealth of resources available, with including these touch point scorecards, which I'm going to have to go through one of them for the coffee shop just to see how we're doing and kind of get a feel for it. I love it. There's 5 different scorecards depending on what kind of industry or product or service that you offer. There's some videos that talk about how to use those, as well as the book. What are some other resources you'd like our listeners to know about?
Well, the website's a great access because you can connect to me on social media, LinkedIn, and please do. And the other is my blog. We're posting content all the time, and when we do events like a team, the one that we're working on right now is the UpSolutions Team Success webinar, and so all of that information is actually posted on the blog and posted on social media. So those, the pattymara.com. Leading to fulfillment, there's a lot of great stuff to start there. The touchpoint scorecard you're talking about, James, it's a tool to put yourself in your customer's shoes and evaluate every component of your business from your customer's perspective. And if you do that with your team, you can't do that without getting some really simple improvement ideas, just to align the effort and the value and the customer experience.
Speaking of these scorecards and talking about seeing things from your customer's perspective, it's just a little story that I think is funny to me. You talk about the idea of walking through a space with another team member, and to look up, right? Just to see the world and to look up and see from your customer's perspective. And you might see dirt and dust or wires and just a blemish in the ceiling that you didn't otherwise recognize. And the funny thing is, early on in our business, we had an office space, and I was trying to teach the team about being conscientious about taking care of our space and our things and having attention to detail. And I saw there was this wrapper or something laying on the floor in the downstairs hallway that everyone had to pass through to get to the kitchen. And I left it there just because I wanted to see, would anybody see it, notice it, pick it up? And literally for like 3 weeks, that thing just sat there and nobody picked it up until then I hired one of my dear friends who was always had huge attention to detail. And she not only noticed that, but a million things I didn't notice and was like, well, what about this? And we can make this better and let's fix this up. And so, yeah, there is something to be said for when you are in a space long enough, it is easy to become blind to all the things that your customers are seeing and judging you by, and you're just completely unaware. So I love that idea. Well, Patti, thank you so much for being on the show. Again, PattiMara.com. The link will be in the show notes /leading to fulfillment. All of those resources are available, as well as the rest of her website and how to get in touch with her and her social platforms, as well as her programs that she's offering, developing. A lot of great stuff. Patti, it's been a pleasure having you on the Leading to Fulfillment podcast. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, James.
I want to thank Patti Mara once again for being on the show and sharing her insights with all of us. Everything we mentioned, including the full transcript of the show, is available over on our website, and you can access it anytime by visiting leadingtofulfillment.com/010. That's leadingtofulfillment.com/010. Also on the website, you can subscribe to our newsletter. There we'll let you know when those new episodes drop, as well as send you original and curated content on leadership, managing teams, and finding fulfillment. You know, it's easy in the day-to-day of leading a business to fall into the bad habits of treating team members like they're just there to carry out your specific instructions, like the old managers we talked about in this episode, who always told us we weren't paid to think. But a good leader knows that it's the opposite that's actually true. Every member of the team is paid to not only think, but plan and execute on their discoveries. Leaders who see it any other way are not actually leaders. They're bottlenecks to the success of their businesses and the fulfillment of the very teams they employ. If you want your business to thrive and your teams to learn to grow, sometimes you have to get out of their way and let them blaze their own trail. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll join me in the next episode. Until then, may your businesses be successful as you lead your teams to fulfillment.